The night the world went silent, nobody saw it coming. One moment, skies were alive with the hum of aircraft, the flicker of satellites crossing the stars, and the steady rhythm of radar and communication channels. The next moment, everything just stopped. In military bases across continents, alarms began to blare. Monitors froze mid-signal, encrypted networks went dark, and pilots inside jets suddenly found themselves gliding helplessly through the air with no control. Warships drifted silently across oceans, their engines dead and sensors blind. Submarines lost all contact with command, floating like shadows under the sea. At first, everyone thought it was a glitch, some massive system failure, maybe a cyber attack. But when every nation reported the same thing at the same time, people started to realize it wasn't just a coincidence. Something had taken down the world's most powerful machines and nobody could figure out how. Panic spread fast. Governments scrambled to reach one another through old analog radios, but even those lines were filled with static. The world's armies, once symbols of protection and strength, had been silenced in a single breath. For the first time in generations, humanity stood unarmed. But instead of chaos, something strange happened. People didn't turn on each other. They turned toward one another. In small towns and big cities, ordinary people began to move. When communication systems failed, they used word of mouth. When lights went out, they built fires and shared candles. When the streets fell quiet, they filled them with voices and footsteps, organizing themselves without waiting for orders. The old systems of command had fallen apart, but something older, deeper, and far more human took their place. Neighbors checked on neighbors. Mechanics gathered in empty parking lots to repair broken generators. Farmers opened their storage barns, offering food to anyone who needed it. Teachers became organizers, using chalkboards and handwritten notes to spread information. In a small mountain village, people dragged old radios out of attics, taking them apart to see if they could restore contact. In a coastal town, fishermen used flares to guide lost boats to safety. In crowded cities, workers climbed rooftops and waved, colored lights to signal, messages to other buildings. It was as if the whole planet had remembered something it had forgotten, that humans didn't survive because of armies or machines. They survived because they adapted, because when everything collapsed, they still found a way to keep going. Far above Earth, hidden among the stars, the observers watched. They had planned this experiment for months, maybe years. They believed that once humanity lost its military power, its people would descend into chaos. They thought humans depended on control, on command structures, on fear and hierarchy. But what they were seeing didn't match their expectations at all. Instead of war, there was resilience. Instead of panic, there was purpose. The more systems failed, the stronger the people seemed to become. In one city, when hospitals lost power, medical workers took their patients into the streets, using mirrors and sunlight to see wounds. Volunteers ran between homes, bringing supplies and carrying messages. They didn't wait for government help, because there was no government left to call. They built something else instead: trust. Children delivered notes when phones stopped working. Engineers used their knowledge of old machines to power water pumps by hand. Shopkeepers gave away food for free because they understood that feeding one person meant feeding 100 more down the line. Humanity began to change, not into something new, but into something forgotten. Every person became a leader in their own way. There were no titles, no ranks, no uniforms, just people who refused to let their world fall apart. For the observers above, this was unsettling. Their entire theory was built on the idea that humans were fragile without structure, that once their weapons and communication networks were gone, their societies would crumble. But here they were, building new systems overnight, made not of steel or code, but of spirit and connection. One observer tried to understand the pattern forming below. The humans were not following any command center, yet their actions synchronized across continents. A broken bridge in one country would be rebuilt using designs shared by travelers who had crossed mountains to spread information. In another region, people crafted wind-powered radios using scrap materials and shared frequencies with others thousands of miles away. It was not organized chaos, it was organic unity. Every move was small, almost invisible on its own, but together they formed something vast and unstoppable. Back on Earth, a quiet realization began to grow. Without governments shouting orders and without armies patrolling the streets, People started seeing each other differently. Soldiers who had once stood guard now helped rebuild roads with civilians. Scientists who had lost access to their labs began working with farmers to improve food supplies using simple techniques. There was fear, yes, but there was also a deep calm, the kind that comes from knowing you're not alone. When the first signs of the cause appeared, a strange flicker of light in the upper atmosphere, the reflection of something enormous moving between the stars, many people didn't even panic. By then, humanity had already learned to rely on itself. They didn't know who or what had taken down their systems, but they had learned something far more valuable than defense. They had learned how to endure. Somewhere in a quiet observatory, an old telescope still worked. A group of stargazers, unaware of the watching fleet above, aimed it toward the strange new light in the sky. They noticed movement, metallic glints that shifted unnaturally. They didn't know they were looking at the very beings who had caused all of this. To them, it was just another mystery, one more thing to study, to understand, to adapt to. Meanwhile, in the alien observation vessel, silence filled the command deck. What they were seeing contradicted every piece of data they had ever collected. The human species wasn't built around authority, it was built around adaptability. Even stripped of power, they found strength in unity. Even without armies, they became something far more unpredictable. The observers exchanged glances, uneasy for the first time. They had expected the fall of a civilization. Instead, they had witnessed its awakening. Down below, days turned into weeks. The skies remained quiet, but the world was alive in a new way. Communities thrived on cooperation. Humanity had rebuilt itself not through force, but through connection. People realized that protection didn't always come from weapons. It came from each other. They learned that strength wasn't about how much control they had, but how far they could go when control was gone. By the time the military systems mysteriously flickered back to life, the world had already changed. Satellites reactivated, radios hummed again, and the old command centers came online. But this time something felt different. The people didn't rush back to dependence. They didn't look up to their leaders for direction. They had discovered a truth no one could erase. They didn't need an army to stand together. The observers watched all of this in silence. Their test was complete, but the results were not what they wanted. Instead of confirming their theory, they had uncovered a secret more dangerous than any weapon: the resilience of human unity. The human race had passed a test it was never meant to survive. Without power, they found purpose. Without command, they found cooperation. And in the stillness of space, the ones who had started the experiment began to wonder whether they had just awakened something they couldn't control. Humanity had no idea it was being tested, no idea that unseen eyes watched from above. But if those watchers had looked closer, into the faces of those rebuilding, comforting, and surviving, they would have seen something that no data could measure. Hope. It moved like a quiet current through every street, every village, every city that had fallen dark. It burned brighter than any weapon, stronger than any command chain. And as the first stars reappeared in the night sky, humanity didn't look up in fear anymore. They looked up with understanding. They didn't know who had silenced their armies or why. But it no longer mattered. Because in those dark days they had discovered what made them truly powerful. And somewhere deep in space, the ones who had caused it all finally began to realize their first and greatest mistake. The world had changed overnight. The moment the galactic order cut off communication with Earth, a strange silence spread across the skies. No messages, no trade signals, no warnings, just silence. At first, people thought it was a system error. The scientists tried to reconnect the long-range antennas, hoping to pick up even the faintest whisper from the stars. But nothing came. It was as if the entire galaxy had turned its back on them. Governments panicked. News channels flooded every home with speculation. Some said it was punishment for humanity's defiance. Others believed it was a test. But amid all the noise and confusion, ordinary people felt something deeper, a strange kind of calm. For the first time in centuries, the sky belonged only to them. The world below wasn't ready for peace. Many had forgotten how to live without fear, without control. The absence of the galactic order felt like the loss of gravity itself. Yet, in that emptiness, something started to grow. In the quiet towns where no one cared about politics or empires, people started to rebuild with their own hands. They didn't wait for instructions or permission. They just began. In one small settlement, a group of mechanics who once repaired old mining drones started building their own machines. Not for war, not for exploration, but for survival. They gathered scrap metal, broken circuits, and pieces of old technology and turned them into working tools. Slowly, their creations began to spread across neighboring towns. Someone had designed a water purifier using parts from a broken satellite. Another had figured out how to grow crops using solar energy alone. It wasn't fast or easy, but it worked. The world didn't fall apart after all. Far above, the galactic observers watched. Their screens showed the humans struggling but not surrendering. It puzzled them. Every other species they had tested before had either rebelled violently or collapsed into chaos. Humanity, however, adapted. Their sensors recorded the strange, unpredictable rhythm of human life. Unplanned, uncoordinated, but unstoppable. It was like watching fire spread through cold stone. The council analysts tried to explain it. They cannot last, one of them said. They lack guidance. They are primitive, but the data said otherwise. Human cities were changing faster than ever, not through conquest or control, but through cooperation. People started sharing what they built, not because someone ordered them to, but because they wanted to. In every corner of the world, new forms of leadership emerged. Not generals, not politicians, just ordinary people who others trusted because they worked beside them. Without the galactic order's control, the planet began to breathe again. Air was cleaner, skies clearer, oceans calmer. Machines that once served war were being melted down to build homes and energy systems. The planet was healing itself, slowly but surely, and humanity was beginning to see its own reflection again. Not as subjects, but as a people capable of standing on their own. The observers couldn't understand it. They had believed that humanity's power came from its technology, its armies, its weapons. But now, with all of that fading away, humans were thriving in ways no algorithm could predict. In one report, an analyst wrote, "They have no armies, yet they continue to survive. They have no leaders, yet they continue to organize. They have no empire, yet they continue to expand." The report was dismissed as an error. But it wasn't an error, it was the beginning of a revelation. Down on Earth, people continued to live. They fixed what was broken and learned to rely on one another. Some had begun to explore abandoned stations left behind by the galactic order. Inside those silent halls, they found fragments of old technology, maps of the stars, communication devices, even untransmitted data. They didn't destroy it. They studied it. They learned. Soon, whispers spread through the underground networks. The Order had labeled humanity as unfit for military alliance. They were considered too emotional, too unstable, too unpredictable to serve in galactic wars. To the Council, humans were a failed experiment. But on Earth, that rejection became fuel. People began to say, if they think we need armies, they don't understand what we truly are. No one could see it yet, but that single thought would change everything. While the Galactic Order believed they had removed humanity's greatest weapon, they had unknowingly unlocked something far more dangerous, the human spirit when left to grow freely. In the mountains, explorers began climbing into the high atmosphere using homemade crafts. They carried no weapons, just sensors and scanners. They wanted to know what was left beyond the clouds. Many of them never came back. But those who did returned with stories of strange lights and movement in the sky. Some claimed they had seen shadows of ships watching them. But instead of fear, their stories inspired determination. Humanity didn't see the Watchers as gods or enemies anymore. They saw them as a challenge, a reminder that they were not alone and that they had much to learn. So they learned. Entire cities turned into schools. Old knowledge was dusted off, shared, rewritten, improved. People taught each other physics, biology, engineering, not in classrooms but in open spaces, in the ruins of what once were control centers. Knowledge was no longer owned. It was shared freely. The Watchers began to worry. Their experiment was slipping out of control. Instead of breaking down, the humans were building up, stronger, smarter, more connected. Cut their signals completely, one of the commanders ordered. They did. The earth went dark again, the skies silent once more. But it didn't stop humanity. With no signals, they turned to sound, to symbols, to invention. People began communicating through coded light. using mirrors, fires, and hand-built transmitters. Messages leapt from mountaintops to islands, from islands to cities. A new kind of communication was born, simple, unbreakable, unstoppable. It didn't depend on technology. It depended on creativity. The galactic observers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Every time they tried to silence the humans, new ideas appeared like sparks in the dark. They began to realize that this was not resistance, it was evolution. On Earth, no one saw themselves as heroes. They were just people doing what they had to do. A mother repairing a broken water pump, a child learning to build circuits from scraps, a group of strangers turning an old factory into a power source. All of them were part of something greater without even realizing it. They didn't know it yet, but they were becoming the kind of strength the galaxy had never seen before. The Galactic Council had made their decision long ago. Humans do not require armies, they had written in their final assessment. They will never pose a threat to galactic stability. Those words would one day be remembered as the greatest mistake in the history of the stars, because humanity didn't need armies. Their strength wasn't in weapons, it was in will. They didn't need vast fleets or superweapons. Their greatest power was the ability to adapt, to rise from nothing and to build again. While the galaxy slept comfortably, believing Earth was harmless, humanity was learning in silence. They were preparing, not for war but for understanding. Their minds were expanding, their spirits awakening. They began to sense that there was something beyond the stars waiting for them. Not rulers, not saviors, but equals to meet one day. The galaxy's greatest misunderstanding was believing that humans could be controlled, that they could be shaped into what others wanted them to be. But humans were not designed to follow. They were designed to create, and that truth was slowly, quietly spreading through the void. Up in the observation ships, the watchers continued to record. They watched the blue planet shimmer in the darkness, unaware that the very species they dismissed was about to redefine what strength meant. Because while the galaxy believed humans needed armies to be strong, the truth was simple. Humans only needed each other, and that realization was the first spark of something far greater than anyone had planned. From the darkness of space, the observers watched Earth closely. Their experiment had gone completely off course. What was meant to be proof of human weakness had turned into something else, something the observers didn't fully understand. The alien command centers buzzed with confusion. They replayed every moment of the blackout, every data fragment collected during the event. Their advanced systems had disabled every major weapon, every satellite, every form of human defense. Yet the result was the opposite of what they expected. Humanity had not fallen. It had reorganized. One of the observers adjusted the view to focus on a massive city on Earth's surface. The city should have collapsed within days. Instead, it had become brighter, more alive than ever. Streets once crowded with cars were now filled with people working together. Small groups were building handmade drones from commercial parts, connecting them into networks that could deliver supplies and even scout the skies. Without military command, people had found their own way to protect each other. Without centralized power, they had become something that couldn't be predicted or controlled. The observers tried to analyze this strange pattern. Every other civilization they had studied across the galaxy depended heavily on hierarchy. When leadership was removed, panic followed. But with humans, the opposite happened. The more pressure they faced, the more creative and cooperative they became. Down on Earth, this new way of living was spreading faster than anyone imagined. The blackout had forced people to rely on skill, instinct, and trust. In the absence of global networks, humanity built a web of human connections. People began trading information face to face. Engineers who once worked in quiet labs started teaching children how to fix power lines. Farmers shared their knowledge about soil and water with entire neighborhoods. Scientists, no longer able to communicate through global databases, wrote their findings on paper and delivered them by hand. At night, the cities glowed with homemade light, lanterns, generators, solar batteries, even mirrors reflecting moonlight through windows. When machines failed, human hands replaced them. When fear tried to rise, people reminded each other that they had already survived worse. And yet, above all this activity, invisible ships recorded everything. They measured human reaction times, behavior patterns, and coordination levels. What they found unsettled them deeply. Humans weren't following leaders, they were following ideas. They were drawn together not by command but by shared belief that survival was everyone's responsibility. In some regions, people built community watchtowers using scrap metal. In others, they turned schools into information centers. Nobody was ordered to do it. They just did. The observers sent their findings to their higher councils. The response came quickly. Double-check the data, there must be an error. But it wasn't an error. The data was clear. Earth had adapted faster than any species the observers had ever encountered. In a small town surrounded by hills, a group of people worked together to build a signal booster out of spare radio parts. They didn't know that their homemade device was strong enough to reach space. When it flickered to life, it sent out a faint pulse that the observers detected instantly. The sound was nothing more than static and a few distorted words, but those words echoed through the alien vessel like thunder. The message was simple. We take care of each other. It wasn't a threat, but it felt like one, because behind those words was something the observers couldn't measure: determination. For a long time, the aliens had believed that strength came from control, but now they were watching a species prove that real strength came from freedom. Every human acted differently, yet somehow they moved in the same direction. It was as if the entire planet shared one mind, a mind built on resilience. Meanwhile, humanity continued to surprise itself. The blackout had broken the barriers that once divided people. Borders, politics, and titles didn't matter when the lights went out. Everyone had the same goal: survive and protect. In coastal areas, fishermen joined with engineers to design mechanical wave generators to power small communities. In deserts, people dug deep wells and shared water freely. In the cities, artists painted walls with messages of unity, reminding everyone that they were stronger together. Even the children understood. They made games out of problem-solving, learning how to fix broken tools or signal distant groups using mirrors and sunlight. Everywhere, the same spirit grew, a quiet, unstoppable energy that refused to give up. Back in orbit, the alien command tried to predict what would happen next. Would humanity rebuild its armies once systems were restored? Would they turn their newfound unity into something dangerous? No one could answer. The models failed to simulate the human factor. Every time the computers tried to predict human decisions, the results came out chaotic and unreadable. Humans didn't fit into formulas. They weren't logical in the way most civilizations were. They acted on emotion, on instinct, and sometimes on something that defied understanding: hope. The observers began to see that this wasn't chaos. It was adaptability. A kind of intelligence that came not from planning but from experience, pain, and persistence. They called it the human pattern, though none of them truly grasped it. As the days passed, the alien fleet grew more nervous. They had disabled the human military, yes, but what would happen if humans realized who had done it? The observers didn't want to find out. They were meant to watch, not provoke. But they had already changed the course of human history by interfering. Down below, strange signals began to appear in the atmosphere, flashes of light that no one could explain. Amateur astronomers, hobbyists with homemade telescopes, noticed them first. They didn't know they were watching alien observation crafts cloaked in the night sky. They thought it was a rare natural phenomenon. Some even named it the shimmer, but something about the shimmer made people curious. Thousands began scanning the skies, recording, comparing, and sharing notes. Within days, a global network of skywatchers had formed, without government support, without funding, just pure human curiosity. The observers watched this unfold and felt something close to fear. They were supposed to be invisible, yet somehow these fragile beings on a small blue planet were already noticing them. The more the observers studied humans, the more unpredictable they became. They found that whenever humans encountered the unknown, they didn't run from it. They tried to understand it. It was as if curiosity itself was their defense. One alien researcher wrote a note in their report: humans are dangerous not because of weapons, but because they ask why. And it was true. Humanity's questions were sharper than any blade, stronger than any command structure. The observers could disable systems, but they couldn't disable curiosity. As weeks passed, humanity had grown into something unstoppable. They had created a kind of invisible unity, each person acting independently, yet all moving toward the same purpose. It wasn't government or military power holding them together. It was the shared instinct to protect life, to rebuild, to learn. The Alien Council had made their first real miscalculation. They had believed that humans needed leaders, orders, and armies to survive. But what they saw now was a species that didn't need permission to fight for existence. Humans were not waiting for someone to save them. They were already saving themselves. And perhaps the most unsettling realization came when the observers looked deeper into human history. They saw that this pattern wasn't new. Humanity had always done this. Every disaster, every war, every fall of civilization had been followed by rebirth. It was part of who they were. Destruction only made them stronger. The observers began to question the wisdom of continuing their mission. They had expected data, not a revelation. They had seen countless worlds rise and fall, but never one that turned weakness into strength so quickly. The truth began to settle like a cold shadow among the alien fleet. If this was what humans could do when disarmed, what would they become if they ever united fully? By choice, not necessity. The thought made even the bravest among them uneasy. On Earth, life slowly found rhythm again. People still didn't know who had caused the blackout, and perhaps it was better that way. They just knew that something out there had tried to break them, and failed. In the following weeks, humanity would look up at the night sky with new eyes. Some felt awe, others curiosity, but none felt fear anymore. Whatever had tested them had only made them stronger. The observers finally understood the truth too late. Their plan had not weakened Earth, it had awakened it. And as the ships drifted in silent orbit, watching a world they had misjudged so completely, one message from their own log stood out like a warning. Never mistake silence for defeat. On Earth, silence only means they are preparing. The galaxy's greatest miscalculation was now in motion. Humanity had been tested, and the test had made them ready for whatever came next. The night was calm when the first sighting happened. In a small, quiet town far from any major city, a group of sky watchers stood on a hill staring at something that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't a star nor a satellite. It moved differently, too fast, too controlled. It shimmered for a second, then vanished behind a thin layer of clouds. One of them tried to capture it on an old camera. The image came out blurry, but it was enough to start a wave of curiosity. Within hours, people across the world began sharing similar stories. Flickers of light, strange shapes in the sky, a low hum that made the air vibrate. Some thought it was an experiment. Others said it was nature. But deep down, a quiet thought began to spread. Something is watching us. The world had already learned how to survive without its armies. Now it was learning how to watch back. When the blackout had first hit, humanity had been caught off guard. But now, weeks later, they were no longer helpless. Across countries, groups of engineers, scientists, and ordinary people had built a new kind of network. It wasn't run by governments or satellites. It was built from the ground up. People used shortwave radios, laser signals, coded light flashes, and even sound pulses through metal towers. Every person who joined added a small piece to the growing system. It was messy, uncoordinated, and yet somehow incredibly effective. When one group noticed a strange object in the sky, another could confirm it. When one lost connection, others filled in the gap. Humanity was no longer divided into nations. It had become one vast web of awareness. At first, the observers didn't notice. They were busy trying to understand how humans had adapted so quickly. But soon their ships began to pick up strange interference. Signals, faint but deliberate, were bouncing off the atmosphere. It was as if the planet itself had started whispering. These weren't random messages. They were coordinates, warnings, shared patterns of light and sound. The humans had begun mapping the sky together. Every strange movement, every flicker of light was recorded and sent through this underground network. The more people joined, the faster the information spread. Within a few days, entire communities had built sky monitoring stations out of simple equipment. Families took turns watching the stars, recording every detail they saw. They didn't need a military command to tell them what to do. Curiosity and determination were enough. Then came the moment that changed everything. A ship, small by galactic standards but enormous to the human eye, descended lower than it ever had before. It entered the upper layers of the atmosphere, cloaked and silent, collecting samples of the air. It thought it was invisible. It was wrong. Thousands of amateur astronomers around the world spotted the faint distortion at once. It was visible for only a few seconds, a ripple against the stars, but that was enough. Within hours, the image had spread across the globe. The observers inside that ship had no idea what they had just started. Humanity had found proof. Not imagination, not stories. Real evidence that something was up there. For most species in the galaxy, discovery brought fear. But for humans, it brought action. They didn't hide. They didn't wait for permission. They began to organize. A quiet fire of resistance spread across the world. Not the kind fought with weapons, but with knowledge and coordination. People didn't want to attack. They wanted to understand who or what had interfered with their world. They used their new network to track the ship's movement. When the craft passed over one region, the people below used mirrors to reflect sunlight in coordinated patterns, forming massive light signals across valleys and coastlines. From above, those signals formed messages. Some said, "We see you." Others were just symbols, simple, powerful, human. Inside the observation ships, confusion turned to alarm. The messages weren't just random flashes. They were synchronized across thousands of kilometers. How could a planet without functioning communication systems do that? How could billions of people act as one? The alien data screens filled with light patterns that formed geometric shapes. Humanity's way of saying, "We're aware." At first, the observers thought it was an act of defiance. But as they analyzed further, they realized it was more than that. It was communication. Humanity wasn't declaring war. It was demanding to be acknowledged. Down on Earth, life had become electric with purpose. Communities that had never spoken before were now connected. Languages and borders didn't matter anymore. The stars had become everyone's focus. Every night, people came out to watch the sky, their hearts filled with both fear and wonder. Scientists who once studied physics began to work with farmers, artists and engineers, finding ways to build better detectors and transmitters using whatever materials they could find. Someone in one country would discover a new signal frequency, and by morning the entire planet would be tuned in. Even the young and the elderly took part. Children painted messages on rooftops in bright colors. Old radio enthusiasts modified their equipment to send more signals skyward. For the first time in history, humanity was united by curiosity and shared purpose, not by orders or flags. The observers, hidden behind layers of technology, began to realize something deeply unsettling. Humanity had built from almost nothing a defense that didn't rely on force. It relied on awareness. Their secrecy, their greatest advantage, was slipping away. Every ship, every drone, every cloaked vessel was now being tracked by eyes and minds that refused to stop learning. One by one, the observation teams began to lose confidence. They hadn't expected the humans to respond with such coordination. They had predicted confusion, fear, maybe superstition, but instead they found unity. The humans were sending signals that no algorithm could predict. Sometimes they used math, sometimes light, sometimes sound. They combined logic and creativity in ways the observers couldn't replicate. It was as if the whole planet had become one enormous living machine made of millions of thinking parts. Inside one of the alien control rooms, data streams filled with endless human transmissions. It was overwhelming, so many signals, so much movement, impossible to trace or block. The observers realized that if they tried to interfere again, humanity would notice instantly. The test, once so simple, had spiraled out of control. Down below, the people didn't know all the details, but they could feel it. They could feel that something was changing, that their world was being watched, and that their unity had begun to make a difference. They felt powerful, not because of weapons, but because they had discovered how strong they were when they stood together. The spark of resistance wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was quiet, steady, and unstoppable. In cities, people painted murals showing humanity's connection to the stars. In small towns, they built community towers that blinked coded lights every night. The entire world seemed to breathe in rhythm, each heartbeat adding to the pulse of a single, united message: "We are not afraid." And for the first time, the watchers above, the ones who believed themselves far superior, felt a shiver of something they had never experienced before. Uncertainty. They had underestimated what it meant to be human. Humanity had no ships, no advanced weapons, no armies left. But they had something else, an instinct born from survival, from generations of struggle, from the will to understand what others feared to face. They had turned curiosity into strength, awareness into defense, and unity into power. The observers debated among themselves. Some wanted to retreat, others wanted to study further, but deep inside they all knew the truth. The experiment was no longer under their control. On the planet below, humanity had done the impossible. Without realizing it, they had forced a galactic empire to take notice, not through war, but through understanding. They had become a light that could not be hidden anymore. The first spark of resistance had been lit, not by soldiers, but by thinkers, dreamers, and ordinary people who refused to stop asking questions. The night sky was no longer a mystery. It had become a mirror, reflecting back the strength of those who looked up and dared to wonder. And somewhere far above, the Watchers looked down at the blue planet and finally understood the truth they had missed all along. The humans didn't need an army. They were the army. Every mind, every hand, every heart moving together, driven by one unshakable truth. No force in the galaxy could silence a species that learned to stand united without ever being told to. The world had changed quietly, almost without anyone noticing. Days passed and humanity's rhythm had become something new. People were no longer waiting for news or orders from governments. They didn't look up to leaders or generals anymore. The real power was now in the hands of the people themselves. The builders, the thinkers, the ones who never gave up, even when everything stopped working. Every night, millions of eyes turned to the sky. The shimmering lights that had once been dismissed as stars now carried meaning. People had learned to watch the heavens like guardians, each heartbeat connected to the other. The fear that once filled the air had disappeared, replaced by a calm awareness. A feeling that no matter what was out there, humanity would face it together. Far above the planet, the Watchers were uneasy. The experiment they had designed to test human weakness had turned into a lesson they never expected. Their data screens were filled with unpredictable results. Every calculation they ran failed to explain what was happening on Earth. They watched cities glow like constellations, not because of restored power grids, but because of human cooperation. Communities had become beacons. Streets that once depended on government electricity now pulsed with light from handmade generators and shared energy sources. People had created power from wind, water, and sunlight, connecting entire regions through simple inventions. The observers could see everything. They could see the movements, the gatherings, the lights. But what they couldn't measure was the invisible connection between the people. Every time one city struggled, another stepped in to help. Every time a disaster struck, neighbors from across oceans sent aid through the new human network. The observers tried to record this strange pattern, but there was no logic to it, at least not the kind of logic they understood. Humans were not following any central plan. They moved as if guided by instinct, a shared will that existed beyond calculation. On the planet, humanity didn't realize it was being studied. They only felt that something powerful was changing within them. The blackout, the loss, the silence. All of it had forced them to rediscover what they had forgotten. They were capable of greatness without needing control. People began to say that maybe the blackout hadn't been an accident. Some believed it was a test, others thought it was fate. But no one knew the truth. What they did know was that they had survived, and that survival had brought them closer than ever before. In one part of the world, a group of engineers built a massive mirror array on a mountain peak. It wasn't meant for war, it was meant to communicate. When the mirrors caught sunlight, they flashed messages into the sky using precise patterns of light. Across the planet, others responded, forming a global chain of reflections. The entire Earth had become a living signal. For the Watchers, this was the moment they truly understood what they had done. Humanity had adapted faster than any known species. They had lost their weapons but gained something far more dangerous: unity and creativity. The observers didn't feel victorious anymore. They felt small. For the first time, they began to question their own beliefs about strength. Inside their command chambers, they debated endlessly. Some said humanity should be left alone, that the experiment had gone too far. Others argued they had to finish what they started before the humans became aware of who had been pulling the strings. But deep down, they all knew it was already too late. Humanity had sensed them. It started with a sound, a strange tone picked up by the new human radio networks. At first it seemed like static, but soon patterns appeared. The sound repeated at intervals, and each time it returned, people noticed small changes. It was a signal, though they didn't know from where. Scientists across continents began decoding it, working together through handwritten messages, drawings, and even carvings on walls. Without high technology, they used their minds. They discovered that the signal wasn't random. It was layered with meaning, mathematical and precise. They realized something was speaking to them. The news spread quietly through the underground communication lines. Instead of fear, curiosity grew. Humanity didn't prepare for war, they prepared to understand. The Watchers saw this too. They had been careful not to reveal themselves, but now their presence was impossible to hide. Their instruments could detect the growing human response, millions of small transmissions directed toward the skies. The humans weren't just receiving the signal anymore. They were answering it. Their replies weren't aggressive. They were filled with patterns of numbers, symbols, and music. The Watchers didn't expect that. They thought humans would try to fight. Instead, they tried to communicate. This frightened the Watchers even more. To them, knowledge was power. And humans, without realizing it, were reaching for the kind of understanding that only advanced civilizations possessed. The experiment meant to weaken them was now accelerating their growth. The Watchers' leaders ordered all further interference to stop. But the signals had already been detected, and curiosity could not be erased. Humanity had seen the sky move, heard the strange sound, and decided to answer back. Back on Earth, communities began gathering at night, not to worship, but to listen. People sat in silence around radios, watching stars as if waiting for a response. The world was united in a single quiet question: who is out there? The Watchers listened too. Their sensors picked up the human transmissions, short, simple, and full of life. Some messages were pure tone patterns, others were images formed by light or sound. It was not just communication, it was expression. The observers began to see that this was humanity's real power. Their ability to connect, to feel, to reach out across impossible distances wasn't something that could be controlled or studied. It was something unique, something alive. On the planet below, people didn't think of themselves as powerful. They thought of themselves as curious. But that curiosity, multiplied by billions, had become the most unstoppable force in the galaxy. As the human signals grew stronger, something shifted among the Watchers. A quiet fear spread through their ranks. They started to ask questions they had never asked before. What if the humans were not just reacting? What if they were evolving? What if this experiment had awakened something that could one day reach beyond the stars? In one final attempt to regain control, the Watchers decided to shut down the communication completely. They sent a signal meant to jam every human frequency. For a few moments, the skies went silent again. But silence on Earth didn't last long. Within hours, people found another way. They switched to sound waves, to coded lights, to vibrations carried through the ground. The human spirit refused to be silenced. The Watchers watched in disbelief. Every time they blocked one path, humans found another. They adapted faster than any algorithm could predict. And then the realization struck like lightning through the alien command. They finally understood what made this species different. Humans didn't just survive change. They thrived in it. They didn't need perfect tools or infinite resources. All they needed was the will to try again. From orbit, Earth looked peaceful. Blue oceans shimmered. Clouds drifted softly across the continents. But beneath that calm surface, the Watchers knew there was something extraordinary happening. A quiet evolution. Not of machines, but of minds. Humanity had proven that strength wasn't about power or weapons. It was about unity and persistence. They had built a civilization capable of rebuilding itself overnight, driven not by command but by cooperation. And the Watchers, for all their technology and intelligence, had no answer for that. Deep inside their ships, reports were written, data was archived, and silence filled the command halls. They had seen enough. The test had turned into something dangerous, not for humanity, but for themselves, because now they knew the truth. If humans could do all this without realizing they were being tested, what would they become once they did? The Watchers had set out to study humanity's limits. Instead, they had discovered humanity's boundless potential. And as they drifted in the cold quiet of space, looking down at the glowing world that refused to break, one thought echoed through their ranks. The humans don't need armies because every one of them carries the will to fight for life itself. They had misunderstood strength, mistaking silence for surrender and simplicity for weakness. Now they saw the truth. They hadn't disabled humanity's defenses. They had revealed them, and down on Earth people continued to rebuild, unaware that their unity had made the galaxy tremble. They looked at the stars not with fear, but with wonder. Because for the first time in history, they understood that they were not small or helpless. They were something far greater, a force born from compassion, resilience, and the unshakable belief that no matter how dark the sky became, there was always a way to bring back the light. The morning was quiet, the kind of calm that comes after a long storm. The world had rebuilt itself in ways no one could have imagined just a few years earlier. People no longer looked at the sky with fear. They looked at it with a sense of connection, as if they knew somewhere out there someone was watching, listening, and learning about them. But this time the humans weren't afraid of being watched. They were curious. They had learned that curiosity was their strength, that it was the one thing that could not be taken from them, no matter how much control others tried to have. Communities across the planet had grown stronger. Technology that once divided people was now being used to connect them. Children learned about the stars not through old data or screens, but by watching the night sky with their own eyes. Farmers, engineers, and thinkers worked together, blending ancient knowledge with new discoveries. The world wasn't perfect. There were still struggles, shortages, disagreements, but even those felt different now. People didn't give up so easily. They had learned that even the smallest effort mattered. A single idea could change everything, and that belief had spread far beyond the planet. In the silent depths of space, the Watchers had retreated to discuss what they had witnessed. They had expected the humans to collapse without their armies, without their machines of defense. Instead, they had risen higher than ever before. They had built strength out of unity, out of compassion, out of something the Watchers couldn't understand fully: hope. Their leaders argued endlessly, trying to decide what to do next. Some said humanity must never be approached again. Others believed they should make contact, not as rulers or observers, but as students. For the first time in their history, the Watchers questioned their own superiority. Back on Earth, humanity had no idea that these debates were happening above them. Their focus was on progress, on rebuilding not just cities but trust between nations, between generations, between themselves and the world they lived in. In one valley, people had built a new type of city. It wasn't made of steel and glass like before, but from natural materials combined with clever design. Houses gathered sunlight during the day and shared warmth at night. Water flowed through systems that powered lights and grew crops. Nothing was wasted. Visitors came from faraway lands to learn how it worked and then carried the knowledge home. Slowly the planet began to glow again, not with artificial brightness but with harmony. At night, the sky reflected that glow. The Watchers saw it too, and they couldn't help but admire it. Humanity's light wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. A quiet message sent into the universe that said, "We are here, we are alive, and we are ready." One day something extraordinary happened. A signal reached Earth, not from satellites or stations, but from deep space. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but clear enough for scientists to detect. Unlike the previous signals that brought fear and confusion, this one carried rhythm and warmth. It wasn't a warning. It was a greeting. The people of Earth gathered again just as they had during the blackout. Radios, screens, and speakers filled with that strange, peaceful sound. It repeated 3 times, then stopped. No voice followed, no image appeared. Just that rhythm, steady, calm, and kind. The scientists confirmed it was not human-made. It came from far beyond any known station, from a direction where nothing had ever been detected before. For a long moment, the planet went still. There were no panic broadcasts, no loud announcements, just quiet, as if everyone understood that this was something sacred. Then, one by one, people began to respond, not through machines, but through actions. They lit lanterns, built bonfires, and sent lights into the sky using mirrors and reflections, the same way they had done before. It wasn't about sending a signal back. It was about showing presence, showing unity. The Watchers watched in awe. They had sent that signal as a test, to see if humans would react with fear or aggression. But humanity responded with peace. It was then that the Watchers realized something greater than they had ever known. Humanity had grown beyond the need for armies, beyond the need for conquest. They didn't seek control over others. They sought understanding. In their silent ships, the Watchers began to feel something new, a sense of respect. It wasn't the respect that comes from fear or strength, but from admiration. Humanity had taught them a lesson that no calculation could predict. Back on Earth, people began working together on something unprecedented. They wanted to build a message, not one of desperation, but of greeting. A simple message that said, "We see you. We are not afraid. Let's learn together." The project took years, but no one complained. It wasn't led by any one nation or organization. It was led by everyone. Farmers who donated materials, students who calculated trajectories, elders who passed down wisdom about the stars. When it was finally ready, the entire planet watched. The message was launched not as a weapon, but as a beam of light, pure, bright, and full of coded information. It carried images, music, and sounds of life, the rush of waves, the laughter of children, the songs of birds. It was humanity's way of saying, "This is who we are." The light traveled upward, passing through the atmosphere, reaching the darkness of space where the Watchers waited. They received it in silence. For hours, they studied every frequency, every pulse. And then, something changed in them. The data they were analyzing wasn't just numbers or sounds. It was feeling. It was art. It was life. They realized they were not just observing a species, they were witnessing something close to a miracle. A decision was made in that moment. The Watchers turned off their recording systems. They shut down their observation grids. They had seen enough. Humanity did not need guidance or control. They needed freedom to become what they were meant to be. So the Watchers left, quietly without a trace. No explosions, no final messages. Just silence, and on Earth life continued as usual. People never knew they had been watched for so long. They never realized how close they had come to being seen as an experiment. But maybe, deep down, they felt it. Because as time passed, stories began to spread. Stories of strange lights moving in perfect harmony across the sky, of soft sounds carried on the wind at night. People called them legends, but others believed they were signs. A quiet thank you from the stars. Generations later, when children looked up at the night sky, their teachers told them the story of how humanity faced the greatest challenge not with violence, but with courage and kindness. They learned that real power was not in weapons or armies, but in unity and understanding, that when the galaxy thought humans needed protection, they proved instead that they could protect themselves through cooperation and compassion. And as those children grew older, they carried that belief into everything they did. They became builders, explorers, dreamers. They reached farther into space not to conquer it, but to connect with it. One day, far in the future, a signal arrived again. It was similar to the old one, calm, rhythmic, and peaceful. But this time, the humans were ready. They decoded it easily. It said only one thing: "Thank you for showing us what strength really means." The message was anonymous. It came from deep space, from a region no one could identify, but it didn't matter who sent it. Humanity understood. Because by then they had already become what they were always meant to be. Not the warriors the galaxy expected, but the teachers the galaxy needed. The Earth glowed brighter that night. Every city, every home, every corner of the planet pulsed with light as if the world itself was alive and aware. And somewhere, far away, the Watchers, now silent travelers of the universe, looked back one last time. They saw a small blue world shining among the stars, beautiful and defiant, carrying within it a truth that would echo across galaxies for eternity. Humans didn't need an army because their greatest weapon was their spirit, the unbreakable will to survive, to rebuild and to love, and that truth, simple and timeless, became the story whispered across the stars. The galaxy's first mistake was thinking humans needed an army. What they really needed was each other.